That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there, while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow. As he sowed, some seeds fell on a path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. If you have ears, hear." Hello again, friends. For our second lesson, we have Genesis 2, 4b to 9 and 15. I wanted to start by saying that this is the inclusive Bible translation, and that I am slightly congested, and I hope it does not affect the reading. At the time when the Lord God made the heavens and the earth, there was still no wild bush on the earth, nor had any wild plant sprung up, for the Lord had not yet sent rain on the earth, and there was no human being to till the soil. Instead, a flow of water would well up from the ground and irrigate the soil. So the Lord fashioned an earth creature out of the clay of the earth, and blew into its nostrils the breath of life, and the creature became a living thing. The Lord planted a garden to the east in Eden, land of pleasure, and placed it in the earth creature that had been made. Then the Lord caused every kind of tree enticing to look at and good to eat to spring from the soil. In the center of the garden was the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Then the Lord took the earth creature and settled it in the Garden of Eden so that it might cultivate and care for the land.
The house that I grew up in back east didn't have so much a backyard as a back dirt. The backyard is on the north side of the house. It wasn't very deep. It was surrounded by big old oaks and maple trees and one locust that dropped these long, dark brown sea pods, which I always found fascinating as a kid. So it didn't get much sunlight, and grass never grew there. So we didn't need a sandbox. We could just go play in the dirt out back. And I don't know how many imaginary miles of road my brother and I built with Tonka trucks and garden trowels. The spigot for the hose for the house was on the south side of the building, and so we didn't make mud pies. At least I don't have memory of making mud pies back there, though it might have happened at some point. Much more so, we just played in the dirt. And I remember that dirt being dry and dusty. I suspect that it wasn't very fertile. I have no memory of coming across worms or other bugs in the soil when we would dig, and I would reenact Mike Mulligan and his steam shovel, or build my own version of the Everett Turnpike, which was being built in real life in New Hampshire. I don't remember the dirt having a smell either. I do remember as a teenager shoving a shovel, I suppose one shoves shovels, doesn't one, into the dirt, cutting through the loam. It made a sound as it cut through the loam and into the dirt, and as it turned over that soil at a neighbor's house where she was going to plant a rhododendron, the soil had this smell. It was this strange combination of decay and life, both at once. That's the soil I imagine when I read our second reading, which is the second creation story in Genesis, especially the part about God creating the earth creature, as the Inclusive Bible translates the Hebrew. And I think this is one of the better English translations of the Hebrew. The creature God creates, the Adam, is the Hebrew word derived from Adama, which means earth, dust, or soil. So the Adam is created out of the Adama. The earth creature is created from the earth. Imagine you're playing one of those icebreaker games where you're supposed to tell something about yourself, and what we're doing this time is tell about where your name came from and what it means. And your name is Adam. So what would you say? I think I would probably say, well, my name is Mud. And that would be accurate. That would be a good response. I mentioned that our Genesis reading is the second creation story in Genesis. The first creation story is the first chapter of Genesis and the first 3.5 verses of the second chapter of Genesis. And then we get a second creation story that starts halfway through the 4th verse of the second chapter. In the first creation story, God speaks things into being. God says, "Let there be light," and there is light. God says, "Let us make humans, Adam, in our image." God speaks humans into being just as God spoke light into being. The Hebrew word used here is the same as the used in the second creation story, Adam. So let us create an earth creature in our image, God says. Because God speaks creation into being in the first creation story, it seems to me that this God is more distant, more separate from creation itself. At least more distant than the God that's in the second creation story. In the second creation story, God forms the earth creature from the dust of the earth. The imagery is of God reaching into the mud and forming a human. And then God animates the human by breathing the breath of life into its nostrils. In the second creation story, God gets dirt under the fingernails. The first creation story is poetry and its rhythm. Each day of creation ends with a chorus of, "And God saw that it was good." The rhythm and repetition works on us, planting a seed in us that our goodness is tied to the goodness of the earth, that our goodness is tied up to the goodness of the whole of creation. Author Cole Arthus Riley wrote, "Sometimes I wonder if we knelt down and put our ear to the ground, it would whisper to us, 'Yes, you are made in the image of God, but you are made of me.'" This reminder makes me read the parable of the sower with a different emphasis. Many of you know that I started my ministry as a chaplain at a juvenile hall, a county lockup for kids under 18. I sometimes wondered if the work I was doing really made any long-term difference. Once, one of the things I loved about the job was that I could see that I was making a difference in the short term, that I was helping the kids get through the day. But I saw enough kids get released and rearrested and brought back that I wondered if I was really doing anything that made a difference in the long run. And I found myself looking to the parable of the sower, the parable we heard today, and I found there some comfort and hope. In the parable, the sower scattered seeds willy-nilly. The seeds get tossed on the path and among the rocks and in the weeds and finally in the garden. The sower doesn't pass judgment on the soil. "Oh, you're not deserving of my seeds." The sower just tosses seeds out there. They land where they will. And that's what I hoped I was doing at the juvenile hall, that I hoped that my words and my compassion and my listening were seeds falling on soil, and that some of them might end up where they might take root and grow into a fruitful harvest. When I worked at the juvenile hall, I was the sower in the parable. However, reading the parable of the sower in the context of the creation story, the second creation story especially, reading the parable of the sower after being reminded that we are earth creatures, that we are made of dust of the earth, that we are soil. Boom. Now the parable seems to be asking each of us, and maybe all of us as a community, what kind of soil will you be? Reverend Dr. Adam White writes, "We are dirt that weeps, laughs, dances, and contemplates. We are the soil from which a strange and beautiful harvest emerges, and yet dust we remain." This is a limit, yes, and it is also a promise of possibility and worth. Receiving our dirtiness as good news tethers us to the goodness of everything God created: earth, water, fire, air, flora, and fauna, and points us to a shared fate. Our dusty nature calls us to be grounded in dust and nature. It reminds us that our goodness is derived from our substance, not in opposition to our substance. That our goodness is calling us away from a relationship with creation that has turned Genesis's dominion into domination and exploitation. That our goodness is calling us to a relationship with creation in which we see ourselves as part of creation. Dr. Heidi Ferris reminds us that we live within 4 intertwining systems of planet Earth: the hydrosphere, water; the geosphere, land materials; the atmosphere, air; and the biosphere, living things. While separating these may be helpful for scientific research, they really aren't separable. The hydrosphere needs the atmosphere for water to evaporate into, and it needs the geosphere for that water to rain down on. The geosphere is shaped by the erosion caused by the hydrosphere and the atmosphere. The biosphere can't exist without a geosphere and a hydrosphere to live in and an atmosphere to breathe, if you'll allow me to say that plants breathe. We also live in a time when all of these spheres can be drastically reshaped by one species alone: Homo sapiens. That is why some people argue that we no longer live in the Holocene, but we are now in the Anthropocene. Understanding that we are part of creation, remembering that we are earth creatures, might help us take greater care of creation. It would be good if those of us who are descendants of colonists, those who colonized lands to which they were not indigenous, would learn from the traditional ecological knowledge that indigenous people have gathered over the millennia, rather than assuming that we know better. And that might help us be better caretakers of creation as well. So let us reclaim our identity as earth creatures. As an act of discipleship, as a discipline of faith, let us reclaim our identity as earth creatures. Touch the earth. Go for a walk this week in the grass barefoot. Don't just eat some food today, taste it. And if you can taste something that has come from the ground as close to the garden or the farm as possible without being cooked or modified or spiced or whatever, all the better. Taste creation and know that it is good. Scoop up some dirt in your hands and stick your face in it and smell it. Maybe you can even listen to the earth when you go for that barefoot walk in the grass, or when you go for a walk in one of the many parks we have around us. Perhaps you can hear what this earth has to tell you. Maybe it will tell you its story. Maybe it will tell you its history. And finally, look. Look with the curiosity of a toddler. Look at a little patch of earth. Zoom in and notice everything that's going on just in that little patch. And zoom out and look at a landscape. Using our senses in our environment and letting the witness of our sacred texts echo together in our souls, I think, is one method of reclaiming our identity as earth creatures. And if our scriptures are right, I think they are, that we are created in the image of God and that we are created from the dust of the earth, then reclaiming our identity as earth creatures may just draw us into closer relationship with our Creator. Amen.